Everybody, good morning. It's my pleasure to be here and welcome. We have four fantastic panelists we're really excited about hosting today. So we have Harrison, Epiphany, Sam, and Hannah with us. And as hopefully you saw from their bios, they cover a pretty cool sector of industry in terms of working in consulting and and finance. So please feel free to pepper them with as many questions. One thing that I just noted in kind of reading their bios is that we often see or perceive that you need PhDs and MBAs and things, degrees like that to really be in this field. That's something that students ask me about all the time. So I know we already have a question about what degrees you need and what types of degrees or training you have to work in this space, but ask all of these questions. This is a great group of panel speakers, and we're really excited to have them here today. So I'm going to actually kick us off with having Harrison introduce himself, and then I'll ask the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll move into some questions. And people in the audience, feel free to use the Slido to submit any questions to the panelists as well, and we'll certainly get those worked in throughout today's session. So Harrison, do you want to kick us off and give us a brief introduction and bio of yourself and what you do and what your day-to-day is like?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Harrison. I'm graduated BS class of 2019, and I did an MS, graduated 2021 with a thesis option. I'm now working at ZS Associates in downtown Bellevue. I'm working as a decision analytics associate. I've been here for about a year and a half, about there, and been involved in 3 projects so far, revolving around Salesforce compensation and data analytics. In terms of day-to-day, I would say that it's a mix between, currently at least for this project, a mix of reading emails, building slides, and doing Excel analysis. And then we have like meetings here and peppered here and there throughout the day. So I would say that that's the main gist.
Awesome. Thanks, Harrison. All right, Epiphany, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day is like?
Yes, absolutely. So my name's Epiphany Wallner-Haas. I'm based out of Chicago, and pretty much take what Harrison did, except for getting a master's. I didn't get a master's. I was graduated 2010, and add 10 years to that. So I'm actually a consultant as well. I did about 7 years at Accenture, and then I'm actually now 12 years total as a consultant. So I've moved to EY, Ernst & Young, and my day-to-day is not only checking emails, doing data analytics, with Excel, and Power BI is another one. I also help sell that work. So the work that Harrison would do, I actually help go out as a senior manager. I actually go and help pull up pursuits, respond to RFPs, requests for proposals, and do that sort of work as well. That's my introduction.
Awesome. Thank you, Epiphany. And we're definitely going to have follow-ups on even many of the things you're already mentioning. Sam, would you like to go next? I'm just like following my grid, so at this point.
No, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Sam. I am based in Seattle, and I graduated with a bachelor's in ChemE in 2019 with Harrison. And I work for Trinity Consultants, which is an environmental consulting firm. And so my day-to-day, similar to Epiphany, I'm a seller and a doer for our consulting firm, and we provide environmental compliance support. So we work with clients historically primarily in air quality, but also in stormwater and wastewater and other multimedia to help them get new permits and make sure they're up to date with their compliance and do all sorts of reporting and that kind of thing. So like the other consultants here, it's a lot of Excel, but it's a good variety too. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. I love the Excel plug there. We'll certainly come back to kind of where that training came in, starting in ChemE. Hannah, would you like to give us your introduction and kind of a brief overview of your day-to-day?
Yeah, hi guys. Excited to be here and get to chat with you all. I am based in New York City now. I graduated in 2021 with bachelor's in chemical engineering. I did the data science focus. I now work at JP Morgan in investment banking in the technology coverage group. So a little different than the rest of these guys on this call. It definitely is a bit of a switch from engineering. I interned my sophomore year at BlackRock in their alternative advisors group, which is a fund of hedge funds. And that was kind of half data science coding focused and half finance analyst focused. And that's kind of what pushed me then to go through recruiting to be in investment banking. Just to speak to my day-to-day a little bit, to give you guys some context, I work with tech companies across, I do a lot with fintech, consumer internet, software companies, and we work with them on any equity transactions, so like an IPO, any debt transactions, so if they want to issue a bond, or any mergers and acquisitions, so if they want to buy another company or sell themselves to another company. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. So I'm going to pick up with what you just mentioned and kind of an experience that you had while you were an undergrad that sort of led you into the finance sector. And this will be a question for all panelists, but Hannah, if you don't mind starting, how did you get interested in this space? Was it from that internship? So you're doing a chemical engineering degree, and I think many people don't think of finance and consulting in particular as direct extensions of that degree, even though there's a lot of skills that transfer. So how did that experience kind of in that direction come to be for you?
Yeah, I think I would start by just saying to everyone on the call, so I'm involved in our group now, kind of on our hiring committee, intern sponsors, kind of sourcing talent straight out of undergrad. And I would say that you'd be surprised by just how much these more traditional finance roles are really looking for people with that STEM background. I think I remember the keynote speaker at our graduation ceremony in 21 was an MD at BlackRock, who is a UW ChemE grad. And he said, engineers are really good at thinking about systems and optimizing systems. And you can apply that kind of problem solving skill set to basically anything. It doesn't have to just be what you think of as a traditional engineering problem. And so I think those critical problem solving skills can serve you in any field, like these guys in consulting or me in investment banking. In terms of my specific journey to where I got here, yes, I think that the BlackRock internship originally was more of a natural fit with engineering because it had that coding component. But then met a ton of people there who started their career in more traditional banking, straight finance. And that's kind of what led me down that path.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great, I think, demonstration of how using kind of the internship experience broadens the network and exposure to maybe other aspects rather than what the initial internship scope might have been. Sam, can you kind of discuss how you got to specifically thinking about the consulting role in sort of particularly air quality, air pollution? Why was consulting appealing to you in going into that area of sort of technology and policy and regulatory emphasis?
Yeah, so I got into the program and was really enjoying a lot of the subject matter of our coursework, but just could not see myself in a process engineering role. It never appealed to me. I wasn't really research oriented either, and so I quite frankly was applying to just about anything that said consulting or anything in that sort of realm. And I ended up settling on environmental consulting because I'm still primarily working with engineers. I've always had an interest in a lot of the processes that chemical engineers are working with. It's such a broad major. It gives us such a broad base to build on, and so there's so many industries where chemical engineers are immediately relevant. And so my experience then translates that I can work with a lot of these industries pretty easily, and it allowed me to keep things fresh. I get to work on projects for a bunch of different kinds of clients, and so that keeps things interesting. And on top of that, I ultimately wanted a role that was very people facing. I think in a lot of traditional engineering roles, you can find yourself, depending on where you end up, settling into roles where you're on either much smaller teams or you're working independently a lot. And I wanted a job that was not only working with a large team and working with a lot of people, but was primarily geared towards working with people. And so, my primary role is client service. And so it's a lot of interacting with people and getting to know people. And that was always a big appeal for me. So.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know that, you do so much kind of team-based interaction in a lot of the ChemE courses that, you probably get, some initial exposure, but maybe not quite the detailed level of people interactions, particularly from a client-based perspective, that you might get training for when you're actually on the job. We'll certainly circle back to that. Epiphany, can you give, I think you've got some really, I feel like, unique experiences and perspectives, and kind of how you started in your career in consulting, and kind of what drove you to doing a consulting-based career, but then also how has it evolved in your time in this field? Because a lot has changed in 12 years in terms of how technology is developed, how technology is sort of viewed, and the role that I feel like consultants sort of play in that space. Sorry, that was a long-winded question, but any parts of that would be cool to hear about.
Yes, well, I think it might actually be relevant for a lot of the people here. Is I graduated during a recession, so job market was not very good. And I also knew that I wasn't really interested in being a process engineer as well, working in oil or gas. I wanted to eventually do cosmetics and be in the consumer products industry. And ultimately, I needed to find a job, and I was one of 6, I think, that actually, when we graduated, had a position. And consulting specifically was of interest because there was Emily Jones, actually, a fellow ChemE in my class, was a environmental consultant intern at the time. And I was like, consultant, okay, let me look into that. And that's what got me to Accenture, and Accenture does strictly ERP implementations. But to what Hannah mentioned, they really, Accenture, EY, likes that engineering background because they know you're kind of smart, that you could pick up something and that you could problem solve. And in addition to that, you also have the aspects of the teaming. So that's what drew me to consulting, and what kept me is the challenge. Oh my gosh, every day you're challenged. I know Harrison mentioned he was on three projects. I think I've done maybe 30 since my career. And each time you're dropped into a bucket, and you get to know, hey, I'm working for Nike, or I get to see Amazon, or I get to see these different cultures, but you're dropped into a bucket, and sometimes you have no idea what you're implementing, no idea, and you're expected to, at day at least 5, be able to talk to the client and speak to it in a well-mannered way. So I like that challenge, and I like that it keeps me on my toes. So that's what's kept me in consulting. I'm always learning.
Awesome. So many great points to bring up too. I mean, y'all are giving me so many talking points. We got to circle back to. So thank you for bringing that perspective, particularly on. We've already had a question come in about, like, how do you learn on a job when you're dropped into so much, new scenarios or new projects every time. So I definitely want to pick back up on that, but we'll go to Harrison to get his insights and kind of perspective on, particularly Harrison, like you I think were quite highly engaged in ChemE in ways that were very, business aligned for a period of time in terms of, like, your interest and sort of engagement in some of the capstone experiences. How did consulting grow out of that? How did your interest in consulting grow out of your experiences during your undergrad, and particularly after doing a master's degree? Like, what motivated that master's degree and then the master's degree to consulting transition?
Yeah, for sure. So what initially spurred my interest in consulting, actually, I started becoming interested summer of my sophomore year of undergrad. And this was before I took part in that capstone project. I was working at a lab at that time over one summer as an undergrad research assistant. And while I really liked the experience, I think there were a couple of things I was really looking for from that experience. And I think the other panelists have really touched upon that really well. So I'll just go over that briefly. It was just the desire to work more closely with someone else day to day on, like, these problems that I was facing. And I enjoyed the autonomy, but I wanted a little bit more of that in-person interaction, whether it was within a team or with client stakeholders. And I also wanted to be doing different things more frequently. And so that's what drew me to consulting. And in school at that time, that's when I started looking into student-run consultancy clubs like the Mondelez Consulting Group. I think that offers great experience for you to get exposure to see what it's like to be in a consulting firm working on these consulting projects. So I thought that was great exposure. And to Professor Snan's point, I also took part in the ChemE capstone that I think is a great opportunity for ChemE students. Essentially, it gives you a platform to help put you in a team that can, work together. You guys can take part in these innovation challenges that are hosted at the Burke Center of Entrepreneurship at the UW. And basically what you do is you pitch to investors in the greater Seattle area about a product that you have. And I thought that was a great exposure to see how you can come up with not only a technical product, but also a business plan and a pitch to help fit with that technical piece that that you come up with. In terms of the transition from the master's to a consulting firm, I think I ended up taking the master's because I just wanted to see if, ChemE was it something that I really for sure didn't want to do. And so I ended up doing that for 2 years. And ultimately that helped me land the role that I'm in now. And so I'm happy that I went through that, but also happy to be doing things outside of traditional chemical engineering.
And if I remember correctly, your team won one of the prizes for the capstone project.
Yeah. We were very fortunate. We over 1.5 years, we took part in 5 innovation challenges, and we raised about $27,000 from all those.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's also good, I feel like, exciting to show that work, when you do like senior year based product and idea development converts into, products that actually have a market and have investors that are interested in it. I want to circle back to Sam's point about working in teams. And this is certainly a question for all panelists, but Sam, maybe if you want to kick us off on responding. We had a question submitted by the audience asking about who you tend to work with in your job right now. Are these other ChemE majors, other ChemE degrees, majors that are not STEM related at all? And maybe Sam, you can take a first pass at that question.
Yeah, for sure. So at my consulting firm, trying to think through, I would say that for our Seattle office, roughly half of us have a chemical engineering background. And the other half being a mix of bioresource science and engineering at UW, mechanical engineering, and environmental science. More broadly, working with clients, it's typically environmental managers at facilities that we're directly working with. And so we're either filling in that role or we're supporting those environmental managers with larger project-based work that they, is outside of the scope of their day-to-day responsibilities. Environmental managers are very, very, very busy people. I learned that the hard way filling in temporarily. So, when it comes time for new projects permitting and things like that, that's when they bring in, folks like us to help support those efforts. And on the flip side, we're also quite often the interface for our clients with the regulatory agency. So I'm working directly with either air dispersion pollutant modelers at the agency or the permit engineers that are ultimately writing those permits. And they also tend to have an engineering background, but that can be pretty varied. There's a lot with environmental science background. There's a lot with more policy focused background. And so it does take a certain element of adaptation as you adapt your communication to who you're working with, because it's a pretty broad range of backgrounds, which keeps things interesting. So
keeping things interesting sounds like a common theme among everybody.
It definitely is.
In this area. Hannah, what about you? What is who are the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis, and what are their kind of most common backgrounds?
Yeah, so I think, traditionally in investment banking, you do have a lot of finance backgrounds, right? A lot of accounting, traditional business majors, but kind of, as I alluded to earlier, seeing more and more engineering, computer science, math, data science. I think more and more recruiters for these roles are looking for people with the really technical problem-solving skill sets. And then, of course, we also work with all of our clients who are technology companies. And depending on the type of company, like if it's a semiconductor company, we might be working with some ChemEs. At a software company, we're going to be working with some computer science engineering backgrounds. And so it really varies across the board. I think at companies, we obviously work with their corporate development function, their finance function a lot, but we also do have some interface with, the R&D departments in the actual engineering. And I think I have enjoyed in this job kind of getting to have that background on the technical side of how, understanding the technology behind how their product development works. And so I think that's been a really cool experience to get to see both sides, how they look at it from the finance corporate development side, and also how they look at it, from a product development R&D standpoint.
Awesome. Yeah, this is I think really fascinating to hear, because it's hitting on some themes that I want to thread through in sending this question to Epiphany. Epiphany, who are your day-to-day people, but also there's got to be language, jargon differences when you're working with so many different backgrounds of people. I think, Sam, you kind of mentioned this, and maybe environmental managers versus regulatory policy. Hannah, you mentioned this kind of if you're working with people from finance backgrounds or investment bankers, you'll have to be navigating kind of terminology and language differences, especially when you're building up a new relationship with somebody. So Epiphany, kind of tying back into your point before about learning very quickly, new things frequently, who do you work with and how do you bring that part of the learning process in? Because this is a huge teamwork challenge, right? Getting a shared language around a project, I feel like is a teamwork challenge. How does that evolve? How does that look in your day-to-day work? And what have you learned, I guess, from that process that you can share with us?
The biggest thing is, it's two things. The first is Google it. If you are dropped in and you're trying to transform a supply chain for a Fortune 500 company and you know nothing about supply chain, you're going to look up a quick reference guide of what's the ins and outs of a supply chain model. But if you're doing a finance transformation or an ERP implementation, it's a total different thing. And then the other piece is there's always acronyms. So, and the acronyms can be different from side to side, from client to client. So that second piece is actually being resourceful and looking at their internal portals. You always get access to, and I might be a different kind of consultant in this panel, but you always get access to your clients. You get your client's email. Like I have epiphany.wallner-Haas at myclients.com. And I'm able to see inside their portal. So I can see how their culture is, how their language is. I can do some digging myself. And that is like engineering or even college 101 is finding the answer through your textbook, through your resources, through your team, and figuring it out, being a problem solver in that regard. So that's pretty much what I learned day one at UW, and it's just continued to carry me along my career.
That's such a great point too. I think particularly when we have so many places we can go for information and there's so much information available at all times, just remembering that information is there and that you have access to these resources that can give you insights into ways that will naturally make teams more functional. I think that those are some great points to bring up. Harrison, what about, I'm going to carry that question through to you. And certainly Sam and Hannah, feel free to jump in as well. How do you learn? This is another audience question that was submitted. How do you learn on the job when you have a new project or a new client or sort of a new sector that you might be delving into with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I definitely think setting up a good knowledge transfer session with the team, either the person who was previously there, or with someone who has more knowledge or expertise about the space, definitely setting that time up to really understanding the material, and also setting up a channel or medium where you can just ask open questions and just being honest and open about what you know, what you don't know. And I think that can be really, really helpful in terms of onboarding to a new project. In terms of what you can do proactively individually, I would highly recommend just being resourceful, like what Epiphany has touched on. Just Google things and find it on your client's portal if you have access for that, and really just trying to be resourceful. Just keeping the mindset that there really isn't a dumb question, so to say, and you should definitely ask your teammate first before asking your client. That's something that I've been taught of. But definitely, at least with your team, you should definitely try to ask as many questions as possible and to make sure that you have a grasp on as many things as you can.
I saw the reactions of all the other panelists when you said that. This seems like a very common common thing of go to your teammates first and then the client afterwards. Sam, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like the brazen Googling that Harrison talked about, I think is a really big one. I think particularly when you're working in a space that's interacting with regulations directly, as I do in environmental consulting, I mean, there's new regulations all the time, and your clients are going to want to know about them. And so there is a certain element that, when you're in this role, it's a lot of like, okay, cool, the Washington passed the Climate Commitment Act, and there's now, GHG, additional requirements for facilities. Someone's got to know what that is. And so we learn, and you just got to do a lot of reading and a lot of digging. And there is a little bit of, I guess, grunt work, so to say, with getting up to speed with things. But that ultimately, it like in a lot of chemical engineering coursework, you do a lot of that, that grunt work and that grind early. And then when it comes time and you're asked the question, it's ingrained, it's programmed, and so I think there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes before the clients see it, like Harrison was mentioning. So.
Yeah, I love the Googling answer. I do that all the time for a million things. And I think sometimes that surprises people because they're like, wait, we thought you were the one teaching us about stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm like over here Googling what the heck that means half the time. Like every seminar I see, like most of the words I'm sitting there Googling what they mean. So I definitely appreciate that.
Just to add one final point, there is a way then, tips and tricks that you could do when let's say your team doesn't know, but you have to ask your client, but you don't want to seem like you don't know the subject matter because they're hiring and paying you dollars for being in the project. So there are some things you could do to ask in a tactful way. For example, instead of saying, what is ABC? You could ask, what does ABC mean to you? Right? Because it could be internalized in different ways depending on the person. So that's one way to ask what it really means without really showing that you're absolutely clueless.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great example as well. Hannah, what about in your area? What's your process? Like, how do you learn? Who do you go to kind of get the information you need? What are your resources that you rely on?
Absolutely. I think coming in for me was a steep learning curve because I didn't have a finance background in modeling or accounting or going through financial statements. I think kind of echoing what these guys said, like I've found being in the workplace, people are always like really happy to have you be curious about things and really willing to help people learn and progress, especially in the first few years of their career. It's something I would say that I'm so happy I did, like what a chemical engineering degree has given me is almost this confidence of like, if I can master heat transfer and fluid dynamics, like I have the skill set to be able to like kind of tackle and learn any new skill or subject matter that's going to get thrown at me. And do it, like approach it in like a thoughtful, efficient way. And I think that's really carried me far in kind of learning at a quick pace in the past 2 years. And I think consulting is the same way we kind of structure. You guys can correct me. I think it's a somewhat similar structure for where each client you're going to have, we call it deal teams in banking. I don't know what you guys call it consulting, but you kind of have like an analyst and then an associate and then a VP, and you kind of layer up from there. And I think just really leveraging my associates and VPs the first 2 years of my career to really get up to speed has been important for me as well.
Yeah, I love that. I saw also the reactions on the heat transfer and fluid mechanics. So I'm going to do a little bit of a pivot to reflecting back on all y'all's time as undergraduates. Was there a single ChemE course or elective course that really strongly relates to what you do now, or you think back on and you're like, I actually really got a lot out of that class, or I use those things more than I thought I would? Maybe Epiphany will go to you, put you on the spot first for that.
Yes. Hannah, you hit home, man, when you said, cause there was times, especially early in my career, when I was, crying like, oh my gosh, I can't figure this out. I was like, wait a second, I am a ChemE. I could do anything. So it's definitely a booster, confidence booster. The capstone, actually, that was the thing that really helped. I was the person to have to figure out the finances, actually. So I used the Excel the most, and I was the person to manage it. So that helped 100% when I actually did the move to be a consultant and had to pull up an Excel and, okay, how do I do pivot table and basic stuff? So that definitely helped a lot. And then also the teaming aspect as well. Stuff we've already said, but the capstone, 100%.
I always like to, after the panels, I'll summarize the courses that were referenced and experiences that were referenced. So it's always fun to kind of hear if there are certain classes people remember, for various reasons, fondly or otherwise, about challenges that were introduced. Harrison, what about you? What was a class that, is there a single class that you really relate to now, or reflect back on, kind of informed what you do now, either in your approach or the skills you use? Is there one that comes to mind?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is probably the same one that Epiphany mentioned. I would say the special design capstone. And I think I completely agree with what Epiphany said about building the financial model or financial projection. That definitely helped me a bit as well in my work. But I think what really made me pick that class in particular is because of its ability to hone your teamwork skills and your communication skills. And those are, I think, the two things that I most frequently use day to day, like just how to work in a team, how to persuade someone when you're not in a position of power, and just being able to collaborate together in teams, because no one is going to know everything, not a single person. So you have to be able to work together with different people to bring their perspectives together to collectively come up with a stronger recommendation than what each of you can come up with.
Awesome. Thank you, Harrison. Sam, what about you? One class that you really relate to?
I mean, not to echo too much, but communication skills are huge. So, any of the classes that required report writing or teamwork or, presentation development are huge. I mean, ultimately, if you reach out to an environmental consulting firm with a question about a regulation, someone at the firm is going to know the answer, and that's true for every firm you go to. But it's the communication skills and the client service that set, me apart as an individual consultant, and set my office apart, and set my, my firm is apart. In terms of coursework though, I mean, process design was really helpful, only because in a lot of my situations, I'll get a call from a client with a process I've never seen, and they say, hey, we failed a stack test, and this pollutant is too high. And I said, okay. And we got into a room, and he drew the flow diagram on the whiteboard, and we're like, all right, let's figure out where this pollutant's coming from. And it's like, oh yeah, I do know how to do this. I forgot about that, but yes, I do know how to do this. And so, you dive in, and, the ability to adapt and get up to speed on a process quickly, for, any number of industries, courses like process design really help you, because you have that groundwork of, okay, I know how flows work, I know how heat transfer works, and, I can help, pick apart where this might be happening or where the issue might be. So.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't hear you mention Aspen in that discussion, so I like the physical drawing of the process diagram.
Yeah, I've done everything I can to not use Aspen. That's for sure.
We'll circle back to the Aspen and Excel comments, but I want to get Hannah's input on. I know you mentioned your internship is kind of one extracurricular aspect, but was there a curricular aspect that really informed what you do now, or you kind of go back to frequently? You're like, oh yeah, I learned that back in the day in that class.
I think this has already kind of been touched on by everyone else, but I do think in the capstone, when we went to divide up the tasks, everyone in the group was saying, I was like, I'll do the finance part, I'll do the cap cost and all that stuff. And so, yes, I think that was honestly my first financial modeling experience. That's kind of I have leverage kind of going forward today. I think, I don't know if there's any other classes that were more a direct correlation, but I do just think having the really strong, math and coding, I think I've been happy with my decision that I did the data science focus within ChemE, and took a lot of classes in Python and R, because I think when I'm talking to software companies and having kind of that technical background to be able to speak from and understand has been helpful as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned Python and R, and then Epiphany and Sam, you both mentioned Excel. Sam, you didn't mention Aspen, well, at least not in a way that you're using it. Are there, we had another question come in about what tools you use every day, like software programs, Word, et cetera. What ones do you primarily use? And are there ones that, in addition to what's already been mentioned, that you kind of oh yeah, this is a great skill to learn or tool to learn how to use? Epiphany, we'll have you go first. I saw you on mute. So
Yeah. The Microsoft Office suite, of course. So PowerPoint, having to put slides together. That in addition to Outlook, looking at that. But Jira. So I specialize in program and project management specifically, and we do agile projects. So each time that we deliver something to a client, it can be agile. So short snippets of short pieces of work that are delivered to the end user instead of a big bang or a waterfall approach where they get the full product at the end. So Jira is used for that. And then Power BI is the other thing. So I have dusted off my coding skills just a tad with some DAX coding, but I have not used R or Python. Man, this is really aging me. We still did C++, or when we coded back then. So but I'm still using that. I'm still using that kind of mindset to be able to code. So
yeah, and I appreciate the emphasis that you put onto Excel, because Excel is incredibly powerful. And if you learn how to do things like pivot tables and other kind of what are frequently used in industry, but even early in undergrad, you really can see the power of a tool like Excel and doing a lot of the work that you would do in your day to day. We've had other panelists on some other panels mention similarly, like Excel is their go-to thing. And sometimes I think people are like, roll their eyes about it, but also are like, oh yeah, this is actually a really powerful tool.
100%.
What about anybody, any other panelists, or Hannah or Harrison or Sam? Are there additional tools that y'all use or you rely on or you had to learn on the job that help with your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so I've grown to specialize in my role in air dispersion modeling. So modeling emissions from facilities as part of permitting efforts, or in response to agency questions about potential health risks or health exposures. And so we use the EPA's AirMod model primarily for that. Which is sort of a packaged model with a set input file. There's not a whole lot of coding involved, but there is a decent amount of troubleshooting involved. And so, it's a lot of leveraging the skills we get in chemical engineering to analyze, complex variable sets and understanding what variables are contributing to, what results. And, as we get into more advanced dispersion modeling, I've had some exposure to R. Never took a class at UW about R. I don't know how to program it. I think I helped one friend with one assignment one time, but had enough background with whatever other coding classes we took that I was able to parse this R script that was generated by the agency and help refine it for what we need. So I think there's as much as I don't use a lot of specific programs outside of Excel, definitely got the skill sets in ChemE to deal with and assess those programs when they do come up, because they do every once in a while. So
yeah, awesome, thank you. Harrison, Hannah, I'll leave it if there's anything y'all want to add, but also you don't have to if you don't want to. It's up to you. You are good.
Hannah, you can go ahead if you have something. I just had a quick thing to add.
No, we kind of hit on the main ones. I mean, mainly for me, it's Excel, which I know we've already touched on. So I think we can move on. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add is I've used SQL in my projects quite a bit. So that's the only one that I'd just like to call out.
Yes, it seems like Excel primarily and some kind of form of coding, but those are things that you can get in the ChemE curriculum or in additional like extracurriculars. I actually want to pivot a little bit and kind of pick up on, like, you've all kind of highlighted some of the aspects of this, of new learning all the time and what's exciting about the roles that you're in. What's the most challenging thing about your job? What do you find, is the thing, maybe not the thing that keeps you up at night, but what is just like kind of a challenge about the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? I'll leave that open for anybody who wants to answer.
So, Sam, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, no, go for it.
For me, it's balance. Knowing when to say, especially for consultants, and I'm sure for investment banking, you could put in a lot of hours very easily. There's always work to be done. And I feel like it's safe to say that usually ChemEs are go-getters, or at least, excel in wanting to do well. And sometimes you just have to say, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I'm still learning how to figure that out. So boundaries. Yeah. Work-life boundaries.
Yeah, I was gonna comment on the exact same thing. I think balance is a tricky one. I think I'm fortunate that I don't work some of the crazy hours you hear about at some consulting firms. I mean, you hear about some consultants at some of the bigger firms that are pulling, 60, 70-hour weeks. And I've been fortunate that I've, for the most part, been able to avoid those. But, we get a lot of schedule flexibility in our roles as consultants. Because you're working so independently and so project-based, I have the ability to leave at 3:30 in the afternoon on a given day to go see something, because I can go finish that work at 8, 9 o'clock at night, later that evening. But, with that comes, less clear-cut boundaries. And so I end up, and even if I'm not working crazy hours, there's often situations where it's like, hey, it's 8:30. The client had an emergency. We need you to, get on and get to work. And so there's some of that flexibility that can be really challenging for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Hannah or Harrison, if either one of you wants to add. I can say I can relate to this point of boundary setting with jobs that could be 24/7. Certainly that seems to be a challenge, and Epiphany makes me feel really good that there's still time to figure those things out, because it's a challenge that I have as well. Academia is super flexible in that way, but similar to Sam, what you mentioned, you could leave at 3:30, but there might still be something that you have to do later in the evening. So finding that kind of cutoff, like what Epiphany mentioned, I feel like is a very relatable point to at least me as being the moderator of the panel. Hannah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just kind of echoing what these guys said. I think in all of our careers here, kind of being in a client-facing role can be difficult, because I do think you lose a little bit of autonomy with the structure of your day, because a lot of it can revolve around the client's needs. And would also preface with saying, for anyone seriously thinking about a job in finance, first, please feel free to reach out, because I know that it's kind of not a path many people do. So it's helpful to have direction from someone who's done it. But also would say, kind of have to give the disclaimer that it's intense and it is a lot of hours a week and consumes a lot of your life, at least in your first couple of years on the job. And so I think that's definitely been a challenge for me, adapting to that. And like these guys have said, trying to set boundaries within that and still have some balance.
Yeah, for me as a relatively junior consultant, I think the hardest part or the biggest challenge is how to become thought partners with your client stakeholders and not just yes people. I've been fortunate for this project that I'm on right now that I get a lot of client exposure, presenting things to the client and things like that. But with that comes a lot of pushback from clients saying, hey, this is not the way that you should go about this. And if your team really feels strongly about a particular approach, how do you convey that in a way that is tactful to the client, who are presumably experts in their field, who have been there 5 to 10 years longer than you have? So how do you manage that relationship is something that I continuously find myself needing to improve on.
That's such a great comment too, to not just be yes people, but be thought partners. I really appreciate that kind of way of putting that relationship into context as well. Because to Hannah's point, if you're centered around what somebody else's needs are, it can be hard, like Epiphany mentioned before, about setting, being able to really stick to the boundaries that you set, if you do even set them. Flip side of this question to everybody, which I think will round out our panel for today, which is, what excites you the most about what you do, or about the future of the field that you are in? And again, I'll leave that open to whoever wants to respond to that.
I think for me, kind of the highlight of my first year and a half, almost 2 years now, in this job, has just been the level of exposure and impact I can have as a 23, now 24-year-old. One of my first deals I got to work on after graduating in 2021 was the Rivian IPO. And to get to sit on calls with the board, CFO, CEO, entire bank group of this organization doing a massive IPO in a deal that was really affecting the public markets was just a kind of a surreal experience. So I think for me, the kind of pulse I get to have from sort of a bird's eye view of these tech sectors that I cover and the face-to-face with these CEOs and CFOs at such a young age has been the most exciting part for me.
That is exciting.
I'll kind of echo what Hannah said, and working on the big projects is fun. I mean, environmental policy by nature has been geared towards large emitters first. I mean, the regulations going back to the Clean Air Act in 1977 have generally been geared towards, heavy hitting, polluters. But as environmental policy continues to grow and resources become more readily available, we see more and more smaller facilities getting pulled into that. And that's actually become unexpectedly the part that I like the most. I really like working with little clients. I grew up in Sumner, Washington, and in Sumner, Washington, there's a client I work with that's a furniture manufacturer, but they happen to do all their spray coating in-house, which means they have a big regenerative thermal oxidizer, and that means a lot of permit requirements. And so, they don't necessarily have the expertise of, a chemical engineer on staff to help them navigate this. And so it's really fun to be a resource for clients like that and help them, streamline that process and make it as painless as possible. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, and a very relatable story to share too about having local impact.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Epiphany.
Yes, for me, the thing that, so I'm going to take this as twofold. One for my personal career, and then the other is where my firm is going. The first is I've built my brand. I'm a senior manager. I'm, in a few years I can go for partner, and I am in a place now that I can I feel more in charge of those boundaries again. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm just recently, as of this week, looking into an FWA, so a flexible work arrangement, something that's moving to a 4-day work week. Yeah. And I'm pretty excited about that because I have a toddler, and so working through some of those lovely things. And then on the flip side, the other thing that I'm looking forward to is I don't know if you know, but Ernst & Young is splitting or is in the midst of talking of splitting. And my particular part of the firm will become publicly traded. And because I am, again, at that senior manager level, that may mean some good things for me. So, so I'm looking forward to that as well. So I guess both things are longevity of being in your career. So it's nice to see the short term or the year, 2 years out, but it's also really great to see, hey, this could be a long-term career if you want to choose it, and you can have a family, you can have a house, you can move around. I lived in New York for 5 years. I loved all of these things, and I'm still a consultant, so with a ChemE background. So
that return on investment, I think, is a really clear piece, and that I'm taking away from your response is that you get that return on investment of the time that you put in earlier on in the career, and it's it sounds like a holistic return on investment as well.
Yes. That is exactly what it is. Those long hours and everything. Yeah, exactly.
Harrison, what about you? Do you want to close us out with what excites you or what you look forward to the most in your work?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short since I know we're at time. But I think what I'm most excited about is just the opportunity to continually learn something new every day. Both in terms of your technical skills and also your interpersonal skills. And consulting, and in my consulting firm, there's a very heavy feedback culture, and people, are very open to giving feedback and also receiving feedback. And I think that's been really conducive to helping you learn and grow on the job as well. So just continually being able to grow every day has been something that I look forward to.
That's awesome. And I think that's also kind of ties into those who enjoy the lifelong learning aspect too, and kind of the, sort of getting to have impact, like many of you mentioned, in multiple ways as well. Well, we are at our time for the end of the panel. I want to thank all of you for such a fantastic discussion and for sharing your insights and perspectives and experiences. If we can get an emoji round of applause from those on Zoom, and we'll do an in-person round of applause for the people. I don't know how well you'll pick up on the noise either way. But thank you all for taking the time to join us. And I'll look forward to following up with all of you on the feedback on the panel as well.